Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and of course, yet another episode of off-seasoning as we have one major bit of news from the last week, a few smaller bits of news, and sort of as a nice theme that we like to do in each off-seasoning episode. This week we're going to be looking at some of your questions for us, but overall mainly your unpopular IndyCar opinions, which some of you sent in. So that's what's on the agenda today. So again, as we try and do every off-seasoning episode, we bring you the news, and then we bring you some little fun segment that we wouldn't usually do, so something just to keep you in the IndyCar loop and a little bit of fun, as we like to have every single off-seasoning episode, just to remind us that IndyCar is still out there somewhere. I mean, it's only been 2 months, but it does feel a lot longer in many ways.
Yeah, it's only been 2 months. However, that means we are, a third of the way through? We're probably over a third of the way through now. I usually drop this at the end of the episode, but as this releases on Tuesday, it will be 108 days until St. Pete. So we're now about 3.5 months away until track action commences.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it doesn't seem very close, does it? But anyway, long way to go, and we've got a lot of our seasoning to go. So we'll crack on with this one. And heading into that opening practice at St. Petersburg, we have one more driver who is confirmed to be there. That's going to be Robert Shwartzman, and he's going to be with PREMA Racing, as we sort of all long expected ever since the PREMA announcement was sort of made. We always thought that Shwartzman would be one of the ones involved. That is now confirmed, as we full well know he'll be lining up alongside Callum Milot, and what is quite an interesting lineup, as if you're not aware, Porsche Shwartzman has raced for PREMA previously. Raced for them in FIA Formula 3 European Championship in 2018. Then he won the FIA Formula 3 Championship the next season. He did 2 seasons for them in Formula 2, finishing 4th and 2nd respectively. And since then, so that was in 2021, since then he's been doing a bit of reserve stuff for Ferrari Formula 1, a bit of GTs, and this year in particular he's bringing the hypercar program for AF Corsa. So similarly to Milot, who both made their debut in the World Endurance Championship this year, they're hopping over to IndyCar with PREMA. So, as we said, sort of a very long expecting announcement. We had a feeling this was going to happen, but another rookie, the second one confirmed alongside Louis Foster for next season. So 2 drivers, I think, already who could create quite an interesting Rookie of the Year battle between those two. So that remains to be seen. But I think, again, really exciting news. Yet another one of this F2 breed. I mean, I'm looking at the grid from 2021 F2. We'll get on to Schwartz in a minute. How many of these names are already associated with IndyCar? You've got Teo Pourchaire, who obviously did a few races. You've got Yuri Vips, who's done a couple of races. You've got Felipe Drugovich, who tested. You've got Christian Lundgaard. You've got Marcus Armstrong. You've got Enzo Fittipaldi, who's tested and testing again. You've got Jack Aitken, who's tested in IndyCar. So Logan Sargent, who's about to test an IndyCar. So isn't that quite bizarre? Almost like 10 drivers in that field who've got some IndyCar experience there.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of, I guess, segueing back onto Schwartzman, you look at the likes of, I guess Lundgaard's probably the one who stands out as having been the most successful of that crop. And actually, I mean, he's not had the results that a Pourchaire had in F2, for instance, or like Schwartzman's had. He finished 4th and 2nd in the championship, which is kind of very much like what Pourchaire did in his first couple of years in F2. Obviously, Pourchaire went on to win the championship in, I think it was his 3rd year. Yeah, I'm really excited about Schwartzman. I think it was with Ganassi he tested, and I recall at the time the reports were really impressed. I guess similar to what we've heard about from Drugovich having tested with Ganassi. But this is a guy who has won a Formula 3 championship with PREMA. I think it would be a good partnership. Obviously, they are sticking with drivers they are familiar with. Obviously, they'd worked with Milot in the junior ranks and worked even closer with Schwartzman. So yeah, it's a really exciting driver. He's a winner in the hypercar class in WEC as well. I think they won at the Circus of the Americas in that kind of third Ferrari hypercar entry. So yeah, he's proven himself in single seaters. He's proven himself elsewhere. So he's clearly a kind of multi-talented guy. I think this is a really cool move for IndyCar, because he's a guy with a following. He's got about 1.5 million followers on Instagram, and I know that's not how we judge drivers, but that's attention that's being brought to the series yet again. So yeah, I think it's an exciting move. Obviously, we've kind of expected it for a while. I think PREMA's lineup is really exciting. Ilott obviously has that experience in. I guess you would probably say Shwartzman and Ilott pretty similar junior careers in a way. Obviously, maybe Shwartzman's slightly more success. But yeah, no, it's really, really interesting, and I think this is a lineup that could really make waves, and I would imagine is kind of a long-term thing for the next couple of years or so.
So there we are. I've just done some counting. There's been 9 drivers in the 2021 F2 grid who've driven an IndyCar at some point, and there was 9 in the 2020 F2 grid, which is quite amazing. So the ones I haven't mentioned for 2020, you've also got Luca Giotto, who obviously did a couple of races, and obviously Callum Ilott was in that field as well. So it's quite interesting. Didn't realise there were that many from F2 in recent years, but yeah, there's been quite a few, which is interesting. So good line. Obviously, the big question is how competitive are they going to be? Because let's not hope they've got a great lineup, but aren't competitive. But as I said, I'm really intrigued for Rookie of the Year because Shwartzman v Foster. Look, if they're on a similar playing field, I reckon that could be a really, really close Rookie of the Year battle, which is more than we had this year. So that'd be really exciting. You look, there could be even more rookies. We've still got a few teams still yet to announce, so that could be quite a storyline heading into next season. So that's going to be super interesting to watch out for. But yeah, I'm super happy for Shwartzman. It's a move I think which sort of makes sense for everybody. Bit of a reuniting something for a long time. Reunite. I don't know, something like that.
In a way, yeah. I mean, PREMA's such an unknown. They've not hit the track yet. I mean, it feels quite late in the day to have still not hit the track. There's not really been any reports either that is. I mean, you would imagine it's kind of imminent, maybe in the new year, but that's quite a short amount of time. It's from the announcement. It was less than a year. I know it will have been in the works for longer before the announcement, but it's not a massive turnaround time, especially. They've got their drivers in within sort of 4 to 6 months of the season, which again is decent bedding in time, but I imagine there will be all sorts of teething problems. But again, they are an elite operation who have excelled at the top in junior formula. So yeah, it's going to be such an interesting storyline, possibly the storyline of next season to follow, really, how they progress. And would you put Foster ahead in terms of Rookie of the Year favorite? Possibly, just because of PREMA being this unknown, but at the same time they could hit the ground running and be excellent straight away for all we know. Yeah,
intriguing. I'm really looking forward to seeing how PREMA get on, because it's always great to have new teams, and obviously the whole charter thing leaves things slightly unknown as well. But I will also be interested to see how he fares up against Ilott, because that. Ilott's sort of a known quantity in his ability, and it's a nice test for Shwartzman. He's not going against Alex Palou, someone who realistically he's going to struggle to beat on a regular basis. But Ilott proposes a good challenge where it's a good target for Shwartzman to compete somebody similar to his level, which I think is great for him. So, yes, very, very good in that sense. And we also had news today that Jacob Abel is doing what I believe to be his second IndyCar test. That's going to be with Chip Ganassi Racing at Texas Motor Speedway. He did a test for Coyne at Sebring at some point last year. Obviously finished runner-up in the Indy Next Championship behind Foster this year still. There's going to be testing at Texas on November 14th. So that's Thursday. So fairly soon for that.
Yeah, this is interesting to me, and it's kind of just come to me this actually because this news is kind of only dropped an hour or so before I recorded. I've not really had time to dig into it, but I mean, this doing a first oval test, does that hint that there is possibly efforts to go and run the 500 with his family team this year? That would kind of make sense to me because I know he's kind of spoken quite a bit about that being a desire. I mean, he was really efforting to get on in the field full time, and maybe that will still happen. But regardless, I think an oval test to me suggests on what is a super speedway suggests that possibly is gearing up and getting some experience ahead of maybe an Indy 500 attempt, because obviously Abel did not run last year, but they have I think 2 chassis, maybe even now. So I would imagine there are efforts there to get that done. And I think he would be the driver they would choose now that he's that bit further on in his development. Had a really impressive year in Indy Next last year. And he's really kind of dragged that team up from what was initially a team just for him. That is now a team bringing up to 4 cars and being competitive on most fronts as well. So, yeah, I'd like to see Jacob Abel get his shot.
Ganassi have also confirmed they're creating this sort of driver development program. I guess Carpenter sort of have one with Josh Pearson, but it's not particularly common. They're pairing up with Palou Motorsport, run shockingly by Alex Palou, who raced in sort of a Spanish feeder series system in Europe, and Kiwi Motorsports, who run a bit in New Zealand, obviously, by the fact they're called Kiwi Motorsport. I think they run the American system as well. I think I could be wrong in saying that.
They do, yes. I guess, Ganassi have had obviously that Kiwi link for an awfully long time with Scott Dixon, so I would imagine that's kind of where that's born out from, and then obviously Palou's team. They have had a junior program of sorts, because obviously Kiffin Simpson was on board for a while, but this is, I guess it's just kind of being able to place young talent in certain places and having control of them from a younger age. And again, maybe being involved in this driver development program, they could, again, reassemble some of the personnel that they have, essentially possibly had to make redundant through the loss of their 2 Indy cars and the loss of their sports car program as well. So, yeah, interesting. One to watch for, I guess, over the longer term.
Right, so as we said at the start of the episode, we're going to get on to some of your questions and then some unpopular opinions. So first of all, we'll do questions. There's one about predictions. Now, I won't go too much into detail about this because we'll have an episode, but as we've been talking about it, do you have a quick fire Rookie of the Year prediction early on?
I'll probably go for Louis Foster, just for the fact that PREMA is kind of such an unknown.
Okay. I'll go for Shwartzman then. I've slightly fancied him a little bit more, just because I'm not convinced about Rahul's package either. So you got to look at both sides of the equation. And maybe we'll do one more little early preview. What should we do? A surprise flop, a surprise disappointment in a bit of a nicer term. Could be a team driver race.
Surprise disappointment. I'll go for Meyer Shank Racing, just because they were excelling so much in the partnership with Andretti. Maybe kind of disrupting that status quo could impact them. At the same time, they've just had to think of that in the spot. They could do exceptionally well. They've got loads of personnel from Ganassi, but at the same time, maybe disrupting that status quo could have a negative impact, despite them kind of, you would say, upgrading to probably the best team in the series.
I'm going to go for Kyle Larson's Indy 500 attempts. Maybe might have a crash early on, or the rain comes in again, something like that. Our thoughts on Linus Lundqvist's situation for next year. So obviously we know he's not going to be at Ganassi. But in recent weeks, he's been sort of more touted to be in and around the picture for a seat. Realistically, you've got an RLL seat left. You've got 2 Hunkos seats left. You've got both the coin seats. And that is it, to my knowledge. So literally, 5 seats left, 2 coin, 2 Hunkos, and an RLL. So coin, you'd imagine they'd be looking at pay drivers, which, as we know, Lundqvist certainly isn't. You've then got RLL, where, again, it depends on sponsorship, but they've known to be favourable to people like Yuri Vips. They've known to be favourable to people like Pietro Fittipaldi, amongst others. I'd say his biggest chances at Hunkos, because Hunkos, I think, will be going for an 100% turnaround, I'd imagine. Yes, you'd imagine they need one probably paid driver in one of those seats. But I'd say there may be an opportunity there for Lundqvist, and I think he'd be a good signing for somebody like Hunkos. Gives a place for Lundqvist to grow a little bit more, and he's not a reliable driver, but he's a driver who we've seen has got good peaks. And like Kirkwood last season, for example, we saw great peaks, and this year he developed that into consistency, which is something maybe Hunkos could help Lundqvist do. But that's the only real destination point I see Lundqvist in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Lundqvist and VK, I don't think I'm forgetting anyone, are probably the two kind of marquee options that are still out there. Am I forgetting anyone else?
Grosjean at stretch, maybe.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Grosjean's an interesting one because I think, there's been kind of reported willingness. He's very involved with this Lamborghini sports car program. So, I could see him maybe being content to move over to that. He had a decent year, but it wasn't outstanding. It wasn't a massive upgrade on what Callum Islet offered for Hunkos. So Lundqvist is the question asked. I mean, he got 2 podiums in his rookie year at the end of the day. And yes, okay, there were inconsistencies, there were errors. And I think maybe we judge it more harshly because he came in with Meyer-Shank Racing, qualified, 12th, 11th, or something along those lines in those 3 kind of substitute races in 2023. And I think everyone immediately thought, oh my word, this guy has been quick and shown pure pace across 3 different types of tracks in 3 races, and he's going to be some superstar. And I still think he could be some superstar. And yeah, okay, he made his mistakes last year and he knows he had those lows. And I think ultimately that's what a rookie year is for, to learn from him. He was never going to be bulletproof like he was in those races with Shank. And I mean, even in those races with Shank, he crashed out in Nashville, for instance. So it wasn't like it was perfect, but I think he is a driver that really, he does deserve to be in the field because, I mean, you look at Marcus Armstrong's rookie year, for instance, it was nowhere near as kind of flashy as Lundqvist's was. And I think as we got to the latter part of the season, especially, he really showed to be kind of a force on ovals. He was really mixing it up quite frequently towards the front on ovals. He was getting the better of Scott Dixon at points and matching Palou at points. So, yeah, I think, I mean, you mentioned Kirkwood. His rookie year, Kirkwood, obviously it was a bit different. He was with Foyt, who were not particularly not performing particularly well at the time. It wasn't like he made his rookie season with Andretti, but yeah, Lundqvist, I mean, it would be so harsh if he wasn't in the field. I think for the rookie of the year to then drop out of the field, just it feels wrong, and it feels like something is wrong if that has to happen. Just following on from the mentions of Grosjean in that segment, there's actually been a Racer article that has just come out, and there's quite a stark quote from Grosjean, who's basically speaking about his efforts to be back in the 77 entry for Hunkos next year, which seems, as we kind of said in that section, is not a certainty by any means. And so he's given this quote to Marshall Pruitt. It reads, "It's all budget. So right now I've got nothing lined up. It is what it is. I think last year was probably one of my best seasons, and I may end up not being in the grid next year," which, again, that's kind of the quote that we need to have an insight into his future. But he continues to say, this is just because the marketing has been horrendous for IndyCar. The hybrid has brought the cost to a level that's unbearable for teams, and that's the way it is. I think we built something good that I would like to carry on, and they would like to carry on as well. But we need sponsors, so we are actively trying to find money for the car. And then once the car is funded, we can go racing. So definitely seems uncertain. But again, if he's saying that the team wants him, Lundqvist doesn't bring budget. Grosjean, he's a paid driver. He's a paid professional. So again, it's up in the air, isn't it? But I think that quote is just, I think drivers have kind of hinted at it. Some senior drivers, that the costs, I know Ed Carpenter initially, when the hybrid first came out, was kind of, we spoke about the fact he'd voiced some concerns to the media. But I mean, I guess it's quite refreshing to hear a driver kind of say it as they think it is, because we spoke about, I would advise going back to listen to our episode where we spoke about Zach Brown's kind of manifesto for IndyCar, how the series could grow, and part of that was kind of putting more marketing budget in. And I think he's been harsh there, Grosjean, but maybe that's kind of what it needs for the series, one of its senior drivers to kind of say that sort of thing. And I think that, again, with the hybrid, that is the concern. Has it made the racing much better? Not at the moment. Has it brought costs up? Yes, it has. So sustainability wise moving forward, that is a worry.
let's get onto some more unpopular. I know we'll get one more question. What got us interested in IndyCar?
Well, there's quite a nice segue that, because actually when it really kind of came to my attention was when Grosjean moved over in 2021. I would like to say it was. I think it was, obviously, after, because 2020 was when he had his Bahrain crash, and then I think that was when I really, Sky Sports really started kind of advertising it, like, oh look, Grosjean is in the series, Grosjean is here. That's when it really kind of came onto my radar, and I guess from there it was really, I guess it was maybe that year, and then certainly into 22 that I was properly started watching the series. But initially it was Grosjean. That was the reason why it kind of came onto my radar. I think a really high profile driver from, obviously, Formula One is what everyone watches, or certainly in Europe, in terms of motorsport. And the awareness of IndyCar without kind of that promotion would be pretty limited. But Sky Sports have done a good job at making it really accessible. Still no confirmation what's happening next year on that front. But yeah, so it was Grosjean, and then obviously when you, as we've spoken about so often, you kind of see the product, you see the unpredictable nature, the fact that week by week you really can't call who's going to win, and you've got this pool of 10 plus drivers who could feasibly win the race. And yeah, of course, obviously the product, the whole elbows out, hard racing, passing fest, the diversity of kind of the tracks the series races on, that all kind of, after initially watching it, really kind of grabs your attention, I think, as a viewer.
So my first race I watched was the 2020 Indianapolis 500. It was lockdown, obviously, the month of August, and this was on the same time as the Champions League finals. I think I had one on my laptop and one on the telly or something. I was like, oh, well, I watched the Champions League final, but I have the Indianapolis 500 on the side. I think Alonso must have been in it that year, which is maybe the reason I was watching it. Anyway, I thought we'd watch the Champions League final all night. Turns out I was much more interested in the Indianapolis 500. It was like, okay, this is cool. Didn't really know anything about the series. And then for some reason, I think it was just one of those cases on TV and it's being promoted a bit more. Started watching it a bit more in 2021. By the end of the season, I was watching every race, and that just continued from there. And it's just the fact that the racing's a bit different. It's unpredictable. You've got ovals in there, the pedigree of the Indianapolis 500. It's quite easy to get into because there's a lot of benefits. I feel like it's a nice time zone for us British people in the early evening. So yeah, many reasons, but that was why.
Yeah, Sky Sports added IndyCar to its lineup of motor racing in 2019, actually, but it was
same
time
really, as NBC then.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, obviously being kind of both having that parent company of, I think it's Comcast, it's called. But yeah, I think I really remember those promotional efforts from Sky really ramping up when they had that kind of figure that everyone knew from their F1 coverage moving over to IndyCar, and that's when I recall really being gripped by it.
So we'll move on to some unpopular opinions. There is quite a few, so we won't go through all of them, but we'll go through some of them. Let's do this one. Graham Rahal has not won his last IndyCar race yet. I rather think he has, to be completely honest.
I will disagree. I think you're pulling faces, but I think everyone wrote him off after he was bumped from the 500 in 23. Sorry. I feel like at that point everyone wrote him off and thought, right, this is it. This is maybe the beginning of the end. But he turned it around.
Well, did he though? Because he had his worst season since 2014.
Well, I'm talking back end of 2023. He turned it around.
Well, he had three more top tens the rest of that season.
He got a couple of pole positions. He would have won on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course if it wasn't for Scott Dixon pulling off a frankly heroic and quite legendary fuel save recovery performance after spinning. Okay, yeah, this season was pretty poor. I mean, I spoke last week, didn't I, on our grid prediction. I think he's probably got no more than 5 years before he maybe moves into more of a leadership role. You can see that's where his interest's going, though, these business interests he has. But I still think the team, okay, they regressed a bit. And, okay, they're losing Lundgaard, who's kind of been their reliable pair of hands. But I still think that they've not just lost that pedigree on the road and street course. And obviously, it's a long time since he's won a race. I've not got it to hand, but when did he last win a race?
2017.
26, I was going to say 2016, 17. So, yeah, a long time. But I will agree with whoever gave that opinion.
His ship sailed. You've got more competition in the series now, and the standards are getting better. And look, since 2020, every single year he's regressing the standings. So, and look, this year, 5 top 5s, no finishes in the top 7, 1 top 5 finish in the last 2 seasons. Doesn't scream to somebody who's going to win again anytime soon to me.
I'm an optimist. I always like to hope for the best.
I'm a realist, I think, on this occasion.
Yeah, not a pessimist, just a realist. Fair enough.
I'm a realist. Let's do... Detroit is one of the best circuits on the calendar.
Disagree.
Yeah. It doesn't really have the history, which I don't like. I don't want to say racing should be based on history, but Long Beach has got like an aura about it because it's got a bit of history, even if the racing isn't always fantastic. And Detroit's sort of this trend of samey, a bit ridiculous street circuits, like Nashville, for example, where it just causes chaos. And I think they said, this individual said that corners like turn 3 were fun for overtaking. That was a challenge, but it's a bit too samey, all the 90-degree corners. And I don't think Detroit were on either of our calendars. And look, if Detroit went up the calendar tomorrow, I'm not sure many people would particularly be bothered.
It's a funny one because it's quite hard to know how much it is tarnished by the fact it comes immediately after the Indianapolis 500. It's something very different. You've got the come down from this big major event. But if you are looking just at the track, of all the street courses that IndyCar races on, it kind of has the least diversity from each of its corners. It is kind of just, and I feel like we've mentioned 90-degree corners a lot recently, but it is just a lot of kind of right-angled corners that it's hard to pass on them. It feeds into this sort of chaos race, which maybe once a season it's fun to have a race where it's chaos and even more unpredictable than the series usually is. But you kind of don't need to manufacture that unpredictability almost because things are so unpredictable anyway. About half of the track in terms of length is that big long straight, which it's a good passing zone, and there's some pretty cool like sections that are genuinely like. It always reminds me of Macau, how just like thin some of the sections of that track are. But yeah, no, I would not be mourning if it was removed from the calendar.
The DW12 does not need to be replaced as it provides great racing already, and a new chassis wouldn't necessarily improve racing.
It's a fair point because the racing as it is at the moment is still pretty good. I know that maybe it took a slight hit with the hybrid. I understand that. I think ultimately, though, if you are going to persist with the hybrid, the package is too heavy, and one way to, I guess, negate that is by, essentially making the chassis lighter. But I think it comes more from, IndyCar's USP is being an old school series. But if you want to appeal to investors, you want to appeal to new engine manufacturers, you need to show that you are up to date with cutting edge modern technology, which is what the hybrid system is doing. But having a chassis that, I think it's 2027 maybe has been mentioned for, it's in the works, a new chassis. But by the time it comes into play, it will be at least 15 years we'll have had this chassis for, which I know it's been evolved. And I know there've been different iterations and different, you've had the aero kits, etc. But ultimately, you've got to stay up to date with, if we go on about IndyCar needs to market itself better, you are not going to appeal to investors if you are still using technology from a decade and a half ago. You just aren't. So yeah, maybe it will take a bit of time to figure out in terms of the racing being as good, but if they get the fundamentals right in terms of, yeah, okay, it'll be a bit lighter, but it's got to be as robust, because that's one good thing about the DW12. It's so robust in kind of that wheel-to-wheel racing. So I completely get the point, but I just think it doesn't benefit IndyCar being with the same chassis and the same kind of. It's like Formula One sticking with the same regulations for. If they were to stick with the same regulations for 15 years, maybe it becomes super duper competitive. Everyone figures it out, but then you almost need the disparity team to team at the same time. So, yeah, I think a change is needed.
The point itself is okay. However, a lot of it is about technological advancements, and a lot of people compare it to IMSA and Formula One, and you're not making technological advancements of a car 15 years old. So it's the long story short there. But the point is that maybe the racing won't get any better. So will get worse. But you need to sacrifice that almost for your long-term prosperity.
So, sorry, just to interject, that's what it's about. It's about long-term prosperity. You've got to look at your long-term. And yeah, while it might be good in the short term, IndyCar has to start making decisions that will benefit in the longer term.
That actually leads us on to quite a contradictory point where the series is a terrible overtake issue where the cars need a massive performance difference for good racing. So this comes to tyres and fuel loads and that sort of thing where they need that disparity.
Okay, so that kind of goes back to the point I was making on that previous point, that actually when you have the same chassis for so long and every team figures it out and maximizes it, you don't have that same disparity, and you need that disparity to, obviously you want it to be competitive and loads of teams to be fighting for wins, etc. But at the same time, you sometimes do need that sense of teams are constantly innovating, constantly figuring things out for this kind of competitiveness. So there's a balance to strike there. Sorry, what were the other points about tyres and?
So the performance difference is caused by tyre age and fuel strategies. That's the only way you're going to overtake. And general one strategy races, let's say the Indianapolis GP with 2 stops and fuel saving, aren't good races.
Yeah, I kind of agree they aren't good races. But at the end of the day, okay, but what's the problem if you're relying on tyres to wear? Because that's part of the package at the end of the day. I think that's part of what makes an IndyCar race great. That's part of what makes, tyre wear is always going to feed into good racing. Without tyre wear, you're never really going to get fantastic racing. It's about, because the whole kind of dimension of racing is that management aspect, isn't it? So I do understand a bit about kind of fuel saving. And I think Zach Brown mentioned, didn't he, about the kind of reducing the size of the fuel tank. We kind of spoke about it a bit there, which could work. It's a good point. I think the hybrid, you need to, as we mentioned, maybe a lighter chassis. I think something with the hybrid is they said that it's going to get more powerful. They're going to increase the boost over time. And maybe to outweigh the added weight, that is something that also needs to come once they are confident it will be reliable. Fair points, though. I think they are fair points.
Yeah, maybe. But you don't need I would also say you don't want a racing package where it's too easy to overtake, or the racing's almost too good where you can't defend against anybody. None of the drivers would do well in F1 unless you stuck someone like Scott Dixon 20 years ago. I think that's very much wrong. You look at Alex Pallou's FP1 a few years ago, really impressive, and Pato Award, impressed the other week, 3 tenths off Oscar Piastri. I know they're not really pushing in practice sessions, but and look, it's hard to compare, but you see Grosjean or Ericsson come around. I'm not saying Grosjean or Ericsson were particularly good F1 drivers, but you wouldn't say they're particularly top-tier IndyCar drivers either, so that eliminates that argument quite a lot. I'm sure if a Herta came over, or an Award came over, or Palou came over, I'm not saying they'd be contending for championships, but I can see them in the right machinery being regular point scorers. So there's not much evidence to go off, but you look at the way F1 drivers have come over and haven't made the progress, and you look at it the vice versa, where actually in the small opportunities and glimpses we have seen that IndyCar drivers have stacked up okay against regular Formula One competition.
And you kind of look at what's happening in F1 at the moment, and people are kind of worshipping like, F1 drivers as being the best drivers in the world, and no doubt a wide selection of them are the best drivers in the world or among the best drivers in the world. But you are now seeing this trend of all of a sudden, to get all F1 for a minute, Franco Colapinto, for instance, Williams took that gamble. He was kind of pretty middling in F2 this year. Williams take that gamble, and all of a sudden we're seeing this trend again of teams taking on board rookies who are, these are drivers coming from outside of F1. And I think by that similar token, drivers could move over from IndyCar and also excel. I mean, you've seen drivers come over to IndyCar, and Nico Hulkenberg, for instance, tested an IndyCar and was really bad. And this is a guy who's pretty good in F1. And yeah, obviously you mentioned Ericsson, Grosjean, Grosjean's, neither of them have had consistent success. Ericsson was consistent, but he didn't have like major.
He wasn't a serial winner,
exactly,
or a serial podium setter.
Exactly, you had other drivers who stood out much better. And I think your argument about look at O'Ward and Palou and how they performed in FP1 sessions, and yeah, you're bang on. That is more evidence that they can slot into that car, and with very few laps in O'Ward's case in Mexico this year, with not even push laps as such, can still, was he 13th, I think, on the time charts in the end. So that says all you need to know, I think. I would be confident that an IndyCar driver could go over and could be competitive, absolutely.
IndyCar race control is better than F1 and IMSA? I'd probably say so. We've had this discussion before where actually I think the penalties they give out tend to be quite fair. There's not many race control decisions you think are absolutely horrendous, or any like safety concerns which you think, oh my goodness, what are they doing? There's nothing really they do which is horrendously wrong. I can't remember a race where we've moaned about race control for the entire episode, put it that way.
Yeah, I know there's been a bit of negativity, hasn't there, about race control, I guess, if you look on social media, but whatever sport, someone's going to blame the officiating for something or other, or criticize the officials for this, that, and the other. So, yeah, I think the wide array of penalties, and obviously, again, in F1, there's been a lot of this talk recently about how almost the penalties are too rigid, the stewarding's too rigid when drivers are pushed off the track or what have you. Whereas in IndyCar, like, again, we spoke about this in the Zach Brown manifesto episode, that you need guidelines for what penalties to give, but at the same time they give themselves this flexibility in terms of penalties that I think is a positive thing, in terms of, if this is the offence, you don't necessarily look at what the consequence is, but what was the offence, how severe was it? Okay, well, we will give you a drive-through penalty if it was particularly egregious, or if it was bad but not worth drive-through penalty, okay, we'll drop you back 4 places, we'll drop you a place, we'll invert the cars. And they're usually pretty decisive, and I like that sort of flexibility, as long as it doesn't become inconsistent, which I know we have had occasionally. But I think compared to, you see F1's getting torrents of criticism for its stewarding. I think IndyCar is levels above, really. I can't really speak for him, so obviously that's a bit different, especially in the endurance races. But yeah, I think I agree.
Having a car owner being the owner of the sport diminishes its integrity. I wouldn't say this is too controversial, because look, you had the whole St. Petersburg incident, and that raises doubts over the series where the team who, the sort of the church and state reference, where the owner of the series' team has been caught cheating in the series. What precedent does that set? And look, there's been the whole Penske favourable decisions, which I don't fully agree with, to be honest. But I can still look. It's easy to see why people don't like it, because it creates a grey area of what you can and can't do. And you don't really want these grey areas in sport. I know it's impossible, but you want it to be clear. And I feel like you're never going to get rid of claims of Penske bias just because of who owns the series.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think the St. Pete thing, and obviously Roger taking that stance to ban key personnel within the team for the most important month of the season when the most eyes are on. I guess that does kind of oppose the claims that there's some sort of integrity issue. I understand exactly where it comes from, this view that, yeah, it does seem, wrong to have someone who owns one of the most prolific teams also running the series. But, people love to speculate and come up with conspiracies. Again, kind of relating to that whole official thing. We have it a lot in football, or for the American listeners, soccer, whenever there's a bad decision, it's never, oh, well, people make a mistake. It's always, oh, well, this is a big conspiracy and they must hate this, that, and the other. And I don't recall any blatant things. I think obviously the Indy 500 in 23 with the red flag is the one that everyone kind of circles back to. But at the same time, it's not unusual for them to effort to end a race under green if they possibly can. So it's absolutely a valid thing to raise. I don't see concrete evidence that there has been a real visible issue where you're like, oh, it's corrupt. I just don't think that exists, as some people have said, but I understand where the concern comes from, of course.
Team Penske needs to own up to its villain role.
Okay.
Because you've spoken about this before, where if you are the villain, you need to play the villain.
Yes.
And ever since St. Petersburg, they obviously have been the villain. So, yeah,
it's an interesting one. I think. So the point you're making there is what I kind of went on a massive rant about. Not rant. I just kind of went speaking about how I kind of feel for Joseph Newgarden in a way, because obviously we'll never know the truth about St. Pete, or at least we won't in the near future what actually happened. But he was very steadfast in pleading his innocence there, and I think maybe we're being naive, but I think we perceived at the time, believably so, he didn't really know anything about it, as much as things were strange. But obviously from, the fan base's standpoint, there is this, Newgarden was the first ever disqualified winner who stayed disqualified, at least. This guy's a cheat, this guy's a villain. That's what the perception has been. And I don't think that's totally accurate, but it has kind of made him this villainized figure, hasn't it? And he's been treated like the bad guy. But, he's admitted, and I remember this at the start of the season when he was speaking about his changed approach for the season, that, he's quite an introverted guy. And to be the villain, you have to embrace being the villain. And Joseph Newgarden is a big personality. He's a figurehead for the sport, but I don't think he embraces being the villain like someone like a Santino Ferrucci would, for instance, who's very outgoing, very extroverted, doesn't really care what other people think. And I'm not saying Newgarden lets it get to him what people think, but yeah, it's a funny one, because Penske, obviously, they have the whole saying of Penske perfect, and again, that doesn't really align with being the kind of mavericks, the villains. And yeah, it's a hard one. I don't think it's something you can artificially embrace. You have to naturally kind of fall into that role.
But would you do it? Because with this church state sort of ownership thing, is it almost a good thing? Where you're seen as the team that people don't want to like.
Would you? I don't think you would do it unless you are, as I said, like a really outgoing, do not care what people think. I just don't think you would. I can't imagine like a Scott McLaughlin absolutely doesn't care what people think about him. But can I see him like playing into being the bad guy, or Will Power being the bad guy with such a guy who's so widely loved? I just can't see it personally.
They do it in NASCAR.
They do it in NASCAR.
So Logano's seen as the bad guy.
Yeah, it's kind of. So how would you quantify they embrace being the villainized team?
Well, I guess it's a case of. Well, but how does anybody accept being a villain? Do you just take it on the chin and move on? There's not like a definized. solution, is it? So
No, I mean, no doubt. I think the series needs villains, but I just don't see Team Penske's IndyCar operation being as kind of buttoned up and perfect, and the fact that their owner owns the series. I don't see them. I just don't think it would work. I don't see them doing that. But it's a really interesting point, and I like that debate. But
maybe another week. Penske Entertainment's doing a decent job. They just have a messaging problem. I would probably disagree. They do have a messaging problem, but look, since Penske came in, and the hybrid was delayed, promised to be this amazing thing. It wasn't. They've lost some key venues off the calendar. They have still failed to get an international venue, amongst other things. Marketing of the series has not improved. Growth isn't really incredible. There's other failures such as, let's say, the iRacing game, the IndyCar game. That was supposed to come out. That was a huge failure for the series. So there's more bad than good, I think, in Penske's reign. Look, I don't think he's done anything majorly wrong. However, stuff has failed to live up to expectations too many times, I think.
Playing devil's advocate, there is the argument that the series may not even be here or be in the shape that it is in terms of having all this, I guess, all these high-profile drivers and teams. I know that's now been barred by the charter system, which is an issue in itself, having new teams, obviously PREMA coming in, but in terms of other teams, that's now not going to be something that can happen. That's an issue for me. That's still an issue that I can understand, but I also think it's counterproductive still. But through COVID, they guided the series really impressively. Saved the Speedway, saved many other venues. They've had partnerships such as with Hy-Vee at Iowa, which has been huge. But I think all the points you raise are completely valid. I think the hybrid system needs some work. I think, they are now seeing that if you look at the New Arlington event, that's a really good step in the right direction that maybe suggests, they are starting to tap into sort of innovation, but at the same time, I think the neglect for other things, such as, saying we don't want to be the old us and we won't go back to venues such as Watkins Glen, which was is a fan favorite, it's a driver favorite. I think that's a bit misguided. I think the whole Pato O'Ward thing as well was a big punch in the guts. That was really bad for Penske Entertainment, for Mark Miles to say all that stuff, and the backlash and the just torrents of support that Pato O'Ward got in the aftermath of that. That was a huge kick in the guts. So mixed. I think they get unnecessary flack for some things, but at the same time, other things have been bad, and the series is, there's a tension on it, but I still don't think there's the growth that it needs, and more effort needs to be put into fast tracking that sort of growth.
We'll do a few more. Helio Castroneves is not an elite driver outside the Indianapolis 500. The stats probably suggest so.
This is the thing. It's not necessarily, it's a criticism of sorts, but Helio Castroneves is regarded as one of the greats simply for his achievements at Indy, because they are that, bar three other people I think have got 4 wins, unparalleled. And that's where it's.
But you're looking at 27 wins outside of his Indianapolis 500 wins, but definitely in the twilight of his career, from 2013 onwards, he's got 4 wins, one of them being an Indy 500 win, which he's a good driver, but I wouldn't say outside the 500 he's a top tier driver. He's not one you'd probably considering he didn't win a championship. Can you put him in that category? Probably not. The likes of Pelot, for example, or Newgarden, I'd say, are a bigger current legend than maybe Helio was.
Yeah, so I'm looking on motorsport stats at the moment, which I believe disregards anything before 2000. Oh no, never mind. No. So it goes to 2001. Castro Neves was on the podium in. It was been on the podium in over 25% of his IndyCar races, which is pretty good return. I don't. What was the question again? Sorry, what was the wording of it?
Hello, Castro Neves is not an elite driver, one of the greatest Indy 500 drivers ever, but does not belong in greatest driver discussions or even top 20 for that matter.
Okay, so if you look and say he's got how many wins? Did you say 25 wins? Is my stats accurate?
Including Champ Car days, he's got 31 total, so 27 outside of the Indianapolis 500.
Okay. I mean, when you compare it to the likes of Will Power, who I guess has had, well, not even the longevity of Castro Neves, if that's kind of the bar you're setting, then no, he's not one of the greats. If you were to say none of those wins he has were Indianapolis 500s. But I guess in the course of history, that just doesn't matter. I think as long as he is a 4-time Indy 500 winner, he will be one of the biggest legends the sport has ever seen.
But we're looking outside the 500, though.
Yeah, if you're looking outside the 500, then yeah, he's probably not one of the greats. But I think it's an argument that is kind of it almost becomes flawed.
Well, like Alex Palou would be one of the greats, but it'll be a nobody in Indianapolis 500 terms. So
yeah.
How much weight do you put to it?
It's difficult.
Right, we've got one more which I've saved to the end because this is podcast folklore. This one, Rinus VeeKay is an incredible talent who people sleep on a lot.
Yes, and I don't need to say any more. No, I will say more.
Discussion. No,
I will say more for people.
You said enough.
I've said it before, but I think he has. I mean, the success he had in his early years with Carpenter, to have had multiple podiums, to have won a race, pole positions. I think he had a couple of pole positions, possibly. And then to maintain the consistency of finishing no lower than 14th. I know no higher than 12th, but that is really impressive consistency for a team that's performance has fluctuated a lot. And in short, for people who haven't heard my staunch defenses of Rinus VeeKay kind of in the past, I believe that he probably should have left Ed Carpenter Racing a year or two ago to really, it's hard when you're at the same team, which has been renowned as a team that's developed young talents for 5 years. I think he probably overstayed his welcome, but that's not a criticism of VeeKay. I still think he's a great driver. I mean, the options just probably haven't been there for him to make that kind of upward step. Yes, I believe he is a very good driver, and people have just forgotten with Ed Carpenter Racing having really dwindled in recent years, had soul searching to do. They've admitted that. He's still remained fairly consistent. I think the way he ended this season was really impressive. He is fantastic, or at least he's really quick in the Indy 500. He's obviously not had the headline result yet, but he's really quick at IMS. I think if he was to go and be put in top machinery, he would be a consistent race-winning contender.
Right. I think Ross's performance next year will give us a more conclusive answer to where VeeKay stands and is at. The problem is he's never really gone against a teammate who you'd say is particularly incredible, which is a hard comparison. And
you're underrating Connor Daly. That's going back to further.
Yeah, but
I'm just.
The issue is Rasmussen, Carpenter, Daly, and a very old Hunter A aren't really representative.
No, I completely agree.
Which is the issue where like he could be good, but it's hard to say whether he's good or bad. But he as I said, he should have jumped ship earlier, and now because he hasn't, he might not be in the grid. He's not a driver that I don't think I'm too bothered of if he's not on the grid. Look at his Indy Lights days, like just behind Askew in the standings, which is unremarkable. I know that's a long time ago, but you don't really have much to go off with VeeKay, which is the issue. Like, I think he's okay. I think he's reliable, but he's not a top tier driver in my opinion. And is he someone who may have shown enough for a top seat? I wouldn't say so. Maybe
if
2-3
you were
years ago.
speaking, if you were speaking 2-3 years ago before Carpenter had this,
But that's one of those where you take a risk. But has VK really shown anything in the last 2 years of note?
no, but
Not
for
really.
a Carpenter team that has struggled very much increasingly so in these last couple of years.
But as Rossi will be the test.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't think VK is an incredible talent who people are sleeping on. I think he's a driver who people respect, and I don't think anybody really. I don't think anybody really says VK is an awful driver, but I don't think he's a driver who will have an impact in IndyCar's future if he isn't or is off the grid. That makes sense. Like, I don't think he's one where if he did go in a year or two's time, people would really be mourning over the loss of Rinus VK.
I think in the right situation, he would prove to be a very capable front runner, and that is the last I'll say on it.
Okay. Still disagree. I'm still not sold. But one cool thing that I've seen during IndyCar off-seasoning is this green light 1/24 IndyCar model Indy 500 pace car, which is pretty cool. And I found that on the Formula Model Shop website, the best place to get your IndyCar merchandise in the UK and the rest of Europe. To make clear, this sort of die-cast 1/24 car has an opening bonnet and opening doors as well. So that's pretty cool.
And if anyone watched the NASCAR Cup Series finale, we can guarantee you this pace car will not crash. An IndyCar pace car has crashed actually in the past, hasn't it? But this one won't be crashing. This won't be doing any crashing. You can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram account for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
Or you can head to the DIVEBOMB website where you will find a pink banner to the Formula Model Shop website, or you can head to www.formulamodelshop.co.uk.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
All right, do you want to do history?
So we are on to the 1940, well, the early part of the 1940s now, which is 1940 to 1944. However, there was only IndyCar or AAA Championship action, as it was still called then, in 1940, 1941, given the Second World War happened within this time period. So we'll just kick it off with 1940. At this point, the Indy 500, at least in the history books, is still the thing that is dominant, essentially. And Wilbur Shaw in 1940 became the first winner of successive Indy 500s. And actually, it was the only occasion that the front row occupants, I think in a different order to the way they started, but nonetheless, it was the first time the front row had actually finished the race 1, 2, 3. So by winning in 1940, this meant that Shaw joined Louis Mayer as a 3-time Indy 500 champion. And he had 3 wins in 4 starts, which is quite an incredible record. But fast forward to 1940, and Shaw could have been a 4-time winner in the space of only 5 years if it was not for a failure on his car that caused him to crash while he was leading the race. And this left him... He survived the crash, but he was left immobile with a back injury initially and was actually covered in fuel by the accident. But that fuel did not ignite, thankfully. But something else that ignited may have actually inadvertently caused this crash. So just to some background on the 1941 500, it was only the second Indy 500 in this time frame. As I said, it was halted by the war. Maury Rose was the winner, and the start of the 500 was delayed because there was a fire in the garage area at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So this destroyed what is regarded or called regarded as a revolutionary rear-engined car, which was being refueled at the time, and the fumes caught fire on nearby sparks that had come from some welding work on another car. This destroyed around a third of the Southern Bank garages at IMS, and the entire garage complex ended up having to be rebuilt that summer, but obviously that was then not used until 1946. But it is believed that actually this fire was what impacted Shaw from three-peating, winning 3 on the bounce, and even to this day would still be the only driver to have won 3 successive Indy 500s. It would have meant a record of 4 in 5 years, which would have been again unprecedented. But so essentially, the crews used to prepare tyres for race day, and they would write on the tyres with chalk to essentially indicate which tyres were their spares and which were maybe lower down the pecking order. And there was one wheel that they found or one tyre that they found was out of balance, and they had basically written in chalk to use this tyre last. But it is actually believed that water from the firefighters trying to put the fire out washed off that chalk. And it was the use of this dodgy tyre that actually caused the crash that prevented what would still be the only 3 successive, 3-time defending winner of the Indy 500, as Shaw was caused to crash by this tyre, which had essentially the reason that the tyre was being used was because some chalk was washed off by the water that was being used to put out a big fire in the garage, which had delayed the start. And that was the final lap that Shaw ever drove competitively at the Speedway. So you've got to imagine 3 wins in 5 attempts has probably got to be the best win percentage of anyone.
I wonder why I didn't do any more.
I'm not sure. I don't know whether it was injury. I don't think it was injury related, because I also read that I think he did a tyre test in 1946. But I guess you've got to think 5 years later, once the war was over, I don't know whether there would have been a change in profession, or I didn't look that far. That'll go into your time frame. So if you want to find an answer for next week.
It's the last Indiana native to win the Indianapolis 500, apparently.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, that is impressive. Anyway, for this week, I believe that's all we got for you. So a couple of unpopular opinions, obviously the reaction to Robert Shwartzman, as well as we said, is joining PREMA. So thank you to the listeners for joining in this week. Hopefully you enjoyed, and of course feel free to send us any messages at any point about anything you want us to speak about on the podcast. But for this time, as we said, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.